Well, I guess I'll get this rolling. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first Contract Standards Community Group call. My name is Max or Maxwell, and I'm a recent onboard to the Near DevHub Community Contributor Program. I'm currently working on identifying the needs in the best way that I can support the community, so please reach out to me if you have any thoughts. I'd appreciate it. One of the ways I plan on supporting will be helping to organize some of these community calls, so you may be seeing me around more often. My role on this call is mostly to pass things off to the community and take notes, but if we end up needing any moderation, I may also step in. I'd like to encourage everybody here to introduce themselves, but in the interest of time, please do so in the text chat. It seems like many people know each other anyway. Just a few words on the format for this call. This is a community group discussion in an open forum for people to discuss concerns, initiatives, etc., relating to contract standards for NEAR. Ideally, the goal of this call is to hear a variety of viewpoints where they exist and move the discussion forward for the greater community. So there's not necessarily any expectation that we're going to reach a final decision on any of these topics. So when we have these calls, just to point this out here in the top right, we'll accept topic submissions in advance from anyone who has proposals for the agenda. Each topic's proposer will be invited to give a short introduction to the topic, and I'll let them optionally share their screen and a few slides if they have them and want to. So the floor I'm going to leave open to anyone can butt in at any time if so they choose, just, hopefully without too much interruption. If it does get too disorganized, which I'm hoping won't happen, I may have to step in and ask people to start raising hands. So I guess we'll jump right into it. Today we have 3 topics proposed for the agenda. We have Sal to talk about Multitoken on NEAR, Robert to talk about Soulbound tokens, and James to talk about some of the Sputnik DAO contracts, maintenance, and upgrades. So yeah, I guess we'll jump right into it. If a single topic ends up taking more than 25 minutes, I may step in to ask that we wrap up the discussion so we can move to the next topic, just so we make sure everybody gets a chance. But other than that, yeah, I guess I'll just pass it off to Sal. Take it away.
Hey, yeah, thank you, Maxwell. I appreciate that, and it's a pleasure to meet you. Yeah, so just to dive right into it, I appreciate everyone joining the call today. Our primary focus here is to talk about the multi-token standard. For those that don't know, I had submitted a proposal on your DevGov to, essentially standardize the multi-token standard and, move forward on something that has, been discussed for quite some time. And, we're, it's really our goal to, move things along and, see this, go from, this discussion to hopefully, standardization in, maybe even the next couple months. So the problems that exist are essentially that NEAR does not have a standardized multi-token standard. Yes, and so we have our fungible token, we have our NFT, but we're comparing it to other chains like Ethereum, as discussed previously. We don't have that equivalent to an 1155, and so that has been slightly problematic and presented some opportunity for us to kind of, think about what that would look like on NEAR and, potentially pursue the standardization of that. So, without further ado, I do want to bring up and introduce you to several people on this call who do have opinions or current implementations with regards to the multi-token standard. Now, we'll just to give you guys a heads up before I pass it on. We'll talk to Alex, who is part of the team Tenamint. Luke, who is Luke here? Oh, there you are. Hi, Luke. And who is here representing OpenForest protocol. Dima, who is not here. Is anybody here from XP Network? No, okay, that's fine. And Lachlan, who is part of the Human Fire team, and then the team from Ref Finance as well. I'm not sure if that will be, is that Evgeny? Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. or will someone else, is someone else here from our finance? We'll get to that in a minute, but I do want to introduce, these few speakers just to talk about how they implement, their version of the multi-token at the moment, and how things can potentially align, and how we can, work towards standardization based on all of these things. So, I won't speak for too long. I'll send it over to Alex, just to talk about how we have implemented it in, for Tenamint. And, actually, before I send it over to Alex, I can obviously speak on Tenamint, and kind of explain our process from the product side. The goal for Tenamint was to provide, was to fractionalize real world collectibles, right? So we're talking about sports cards or Pokemon cards, real world collectibles that need to be truly fractional representations of that specific card. So you can imagine how 100 or 600 NFTs of one card doesn't serve the same process or isn't a solution to one fractional card that is split into 600 fractions. And that's where the multi-token standard really came in for us. And of course, it was important for it to have reward, royalty type mechanisms, and just truly be reflective of that fractionalization. And so I'll pass it over to Alex to perhaps speak on it from a more technical standpoint, and to discuss the goals of the multi-token standard for us.
Okay, thanks, Sal. So in a nutshell, we have two goals that we want to achieve from a technical point of view. Have a way to efficiently mint and manage token lifecycle, and have a nice UI for people to see their tokens inside of a wallet. To achieve both of them, we need the multi-token standard. And even though it's possible to use NFTs to achieve, to somewhat achieve these goals, it just feels very much like a workaround. And that's in a nutshell the basis of the implementation. We took the NFT standard as a basis, and the spec that was proposed at the time, looked for bugs, did the full implementation for our use case, which is fractional ownership. Which is slightly different from some use cases that you'd find in, for example, liquidity pools or gaming community. At its core, we try to just be as unopinionated as possible, and just create a bare bone implementation which reflects the existing functionality from the NFT standard, and pretty much pass it over to the community to see if there's any other thoughts, ideas, opinions, to make it reusable. Like the main issue we had was that we found competing implementations already, but no standard, and we were a little bit puzzled because we wanted our tokens to be displayed nicely across the community, not just on our website. So that's in a nutshell. Happy to answer any specific questions if you guys have.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Maybe perhaps we pass it on to Luke to talk about the implementation on OpenForest, and then we can get additional feedback, whether it's comparing, contrasting, or finding a solution here long term. So we can probably do that after. So Luke, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course, Sal. Thanks so much. I actually had a quick question, Alex. So it sounds like for you guys, and Sal might be able to speak to this as well. Sounds like you don't really need to change much with the existing standard, right? It's kind of good as is for y'all.
That was a hope initially, but like as we dug deeper, we ran a couple of edge cases. For instance, when you transfer an NFT, you obviously have a quantity of one, which is simple, so you don't need to really authorize a transfer, a quantity to transfer. You just authorize the actual ID.
Yeah.
Now, when we did it with semi-fungibles, you have to authorize a quantity, but then you might do a partial transfer, and then you have to take into account this. So because of this, we ran into a couple of edge case scenarios, which meant some of the logs, some of the callbacks, some of the events, which just not backwards compatible with. Like
Gotcha.
that's an example of an edge case in which
We're kind of losing you,
issues,
Alex.
which makes it to the specs. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, could you go back about 40 seconds? It seems like you're back now. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, your connection.
I will try to repeat one more time.
Okay.
And all good, Alex. I think you've answered my
what I
question.
can do.
So if you don't want to go through it, then all good. I can take it from here.
Yeah, I can also write that not better. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, I'll go ahead and take it then. So yeah, thanks so much everyone for being here. Great to see you all. Awesome that we have this meeting going on. So if this was Max, if this was your idea or whoever's idea was it to do this, and for you guys for implementing it, great job. So thank you. This is a hugely important part of the near infrastructure that we need to keep going. So this is awesome. So I'm from OpenForest Protocol. Basically, if you're not familiar, we're a refi project. Regenerative finance is the word there. If you're unfamiliar with carbon credits, I'm linking a Boston Consulting Group kind of article that tells you a little bit about it, and generally kind of gives you some insight into what it is that we're doing, because it's a little bit different from a lot of other crypto platforms and projects that you might be familiar with. Essentially, we're taking a real world commodity asset. In this case, it's this thing called carbon credits. That is a commodity that's traded on a global market that's expected to expand dramatically in the near future. And this commodity represents carbon that's taken out of the atmosphere and stored in trees. So we basically have a process that quantifies that with people on the ground. Yeah, thanks, Sal. And then there's our link for our website there as well. You can learn a little bit more information. Happy to also set up a call anytime. But basically, we have a system that takes that carbon, calculates it, and then issues a number of carbon credits as tokenized assets for these projects. So the interesting thing is that for these projects, it's similar to trading cards. The tokens that are issued, they are non-fungible with respect to the project that they come from. One carbon credit is not fungible to another carbon credit if they're produced by different projects, because there are certain criteria that give value to that commodity. Kind of like if you're buying coffee, and one coffee bean is just some standard off-the-shelf Folgers, which is a really cheap brand in America type of coffee. You don't really know where it came from. You don't really know what kind of bean that is. It's just coffee. Versus the kind of boutique coffee beans that's grown in shade, employing local indigenous communities in Guatemala and the mountains. And they're also using this for goat farming or whatever. And thus, you know, basically there's commodities out there that have certain benefits depending on where it's sourced from and depending on that veracity of that data. And so we're creating a commodity asset, type asset, that also gains value based on that information. And so we have to have an asset that is fungible enough to be able to be transacted. So you have to have multiple carbon credits because you'll be issuing, you know, thousands of them potentially. But also have them be non-fungible enough to be able to retain that information of where it came from, some of the details for its origin, kind of like understanding, you know, where did your coffee beans come from? Were they from this really nice Guatemalan place that pays people well, or was it just from some random place somewhere? So yeah, so that's sort of the idea. And we're using the multi-token standard generally as it is, I think as the current implementation is right now. We just need it finalized. So I think, you know, for us, there's not really anything that needs to be changed about it at this point in time. I think we've already implemented it, and we're already building with our own implementation. We can change it, obviously, but yeah, I think that generally for us, it's just, this would be a huge, very important thing for us to be able to push forward, because then once we standardize this, we'll be able to transact those carbon credits across chains and just generally have better interoperability, better legitimacy, and then also be able to kind of transact that stuff on Near as well. So the tokens that we create could be sold at various different exchanges and then also bridged over. So yeah, without that existing standard in place, that infrastructure, then that kind of listing on marketplaces of these commodities which would then facilitate the sale, going back to the original producers of it. And as well as, interoperability, those are threatened by this. So yeah, basically here to say we have a super important use case for it. We really want it to be pushed forward. So anything we can do to kind of make it work, let's do that. Yeah,
Thank you,
totally
Luke.
agree, Sal.
I appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions regarding OpenForest protocol or the implementation?
Kind of. Hey, so I'm Lachlan. I'm with Few and Far. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone getting on this call. I propose that we have this for the multi-token discussion because, I just wanted to kind of express some thoughts and potential concerns that I had around the implementation. There are a few factors. One is that to me, it seems like the kind of general idea of like whether these semi-fungible tokens essentially are like derived from a non-fungible token standard or derived from a fungible token standard seems to me to be a important design choice. And it seems to me that they bear more in common with fungible assets than non-fungible assets. Like you're saying, like they're like, coffee beans from the same grower, they're essentially interchangeable. They're not interchangeable with coffee beans from another grower, but they are interchangeable. And I think from a marketplace's perspective, it makes a lot more sense to think of this and design this in that way as like essentially an extension of like the fungible token standard that maybe beefs up the metadata of fungible token standard. The other, and I'm just expressing these concerns now because I also have a hard stop in 10 minutes, unfortunately. I also had concerns just over the desire for this to be adopted, which I fully agree. Like we need a solution on near for semi-fungible tokens, especially coming from EVM chains, and even native near needs for semi-fungible tokens. But I don't think that introducing essentially a new kind of NFT, as would be represented by an NFT contained in a new multi-token contract as specified by the standard, or a new fungible token as would be implemented by a fungible token contained within this multi-token standard, is a way to gain adoption, because that essentially doubles the complexity for indexers and other clients. While I recognize that this is the case on Ethereum, and there is a desire for bridging, et cetera, and so naturally the idea of like a corresponding standard, like an ERC 1155 clone on Near is very attractive from a bridging kind of perspective. Near is not Ethereum, obviously, and we have our own kind of ecosystem and tech that has evolved kind of independently. We have a totally different kind of runtime, et cetera, which creates unique technical requirements. And so I guess I just wanted to encourage thinking about with the idea of the goal of adoption. And of course, at Few and Far, we want to support this. We want to push it forward. We want to enable people to transact semi-fungible tokens. I just wanted to propose that the most likely scenario for adoption is probably the one that requires the least amount of work on the part of indexers, et cetera. Not saying that people shouldn't do work, obviously, but I do just think that introducing an entirely new contract standard is probably not the most effective way to go about it, while I recognize the incentive or the motivation for that. And there's one more thing which I'm trying to remember. And my babies are crying in the background and I can't remember what I was going to say, but I will I will raise that if it comes to mind. So yeah, that's just what I kind of wanted to express.
Yeah, Lachlan, I totally agree. I'll just say from our perspective, we did look at creating an alternative implementation of the fungible token standard on Near. We scrapped that though because there was no standardized version of that. So, but yeah, I mean, it would be more helpful to list that type of stuff on exchanges if we make something that is, easier to index, easier to just kind of be represented as a multiple asset. But I still think though that like the semi-fund or the multi-token standard will still be able to accomplish that, and I think there's room for both probably.
Sorry, I remember the other thing I just wanted to say, which is that in perusing the multi-token standard, it looks like almost an exact clone of the NFT standard with, you know, the addition of like 1 or 2 extra arguments here or there, which also just feels like if we're going to maintain these 2 standards that are basically duplicate code, doesn't sound like it's very easily maintainable, or maybe that's an indicator that that the design needs to be rethought, just as a thought.
Yeah, some very good points there. I know we only have you for a few more minutes, but is there a, like, you know, you've spoken to kind of why not the multi-token standard, but what is the solution for, you know, use cases like, you know, what we're building at Tenamint, what Luke is building with OpenForest, and what is like the alternative that kind of meets the needs of not only obviously our projects, but like the future projects that have the same kind of needs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily have the solution. And again, like I'm not kind of the one implementing it. So, but I do think that there probably is, I just have a feeling that there is probably a solution around looking at the metadata associated with the existing fungible token standard, and maybe kind of working with that to be able to support essentially a fungible token that, you know, has a more robust metadata associated with it. Then you of course have like other elements of ERC 1155, like, you know, if you want a contract to contain, you know, fungible tokens and semi-fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens, you know, ERC 1155 does that very efficiently and cleanly, but it does mean that a lot of the work for determining the token types and all of that kind of like comes down to the indexers and the processors, because it's not kind of delineated within the contract. And, you know, a minimal implementation is, you know, that it does make sense kind of why that was utilized. I just think that if we basically have essentially 3 kinds of tokens, right? Fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, and semi-fungible tokens, and like the ability to have, you know, maybe there are other types of tokens in the future, then yeah, I would just kind of encourage thinking about it a little bit more composably and seeing if this can essentially be supported without like a mass migration, you know, over to a new standard, you know, just because it's going to be really tough. Because that was specified in one of the proposals, was like the intention here is for this to be adopted as like the token standard, like ERC 1155 is on Ethereum. But I just personally like don't realistically see that happening in the same way, because we're just a different chain at a different point in our development, different point in our community, etc.
Yeah, very well said. Alex, did you have anything to say with regards to that feedback there? I saw you on mute, that's why.
Yeah.
Alex, you're still cutting out, Alex. You want to maybe dial?
I think that yeah, I'll dial. Okay, I'll dial.
Yeah, if I may, Sal, have just a quick comment on that. I think, Lachlan, that your points are absolutely right, and it's great to think about that. I think also, though, we do kind of need to, I mean, right now we have 2, probably more projects that are in pretty dire need, I'd say, of this being implemented relatively quickly. And I don't see much of a downside of having there be multiple token standards that are out there that are capable of this, or at least revising that process going forward. Right now, the fact that the NEAR does not have an ERC 1155 equivalent is honestly, I mean, kind of embarrassing. We sort of need to catch up there. I've had so many conversations with people, like at Consensus last week. You know, I was like, yeah, we're going to be using this, but when NEAR finalizes the ERC 1155 standard and equivalent, and they're like, what do you mean NEAR doesn't have that yet? You know, all these people from Polygon and Celo and Hedera and whatnot. So yeah, so it's one of those things that I think would be beneficial to move forward on and to spend energy on. I don't think that that's going to be something that will detract in any way meaningfully in the future, especially given that we can revise this and we can create new standards. So just wanted to throw that out there though.
Right. Yeah, very good point, Luke. I've had some of those, you know, some similar conversations as well. And, you know, I don't know if we have anybody here who is actually working on, you know, the blockchain operating system directly, but I can imagine that there is probably some future use case for that equivalent, 1155 equivalent, you know, with the kind of top level goals of the blockchain operating system. And you know, I'm not 100% sure, but it just like high level, it seems like that sounds, you know, it sounds well aligned. Now, my question was, look, I'm probably the least technical person in here. And I do my best to fully understand everything that's being discussed and the, you know, the details of these standards, and all of this. But my question is, you know, you mentioned the maintenance, Lachlan. Is there, what does maintenance look like of a token, and of a standard? And is that, you know, what Luke was saying, as if like, you know, Luke was suggesting that there's limited downside to actually having an additional standard that is capable of more. Is there a downside, or is the maintenance like, you know, not a big deal?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we do have a multi-token standard. It exists, right? But no one uses it. So it's essentially, that's, in my opinion, the downside of having a standard that's not designed correctly. Or that may, and I'm not saying that this isn't designed correctly, I'm just voicing my concerns, but my concern is that the downside to introducing a new standard without like really thoroughly vetting it is, well, firstly, it's a very long, it'll be a long kind of process of building it and getting community feedback and reviewing and voting and all of that kind of stuff. And if it gets through, it is even small updates to existing standards. It's really hard to actually get them implemented, like on indexers, on marketplace, like on all these different clients all over the place. And that's also like me speaking from experience in terms of that. So I would say the downside is just, it just risks essentially creating more fragmentation, and creating something, ultimately, if something is introduced to the standards, I think the idea is that it should be supported across the board. And so I would just say, like, the concern would be if it's introduced and it's not supported across the board, it's just a little dicey, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Yeah, and you know, we definitely appreciate that perspective. We have some questions in the chat. Shot, you were asking what are blockers from the 245 being getting passed. And Alexander with,
yeah. Oh, so this was not actually, right? Interesting.
Yeah,
so
I wanted to say that it's not.
It's a draft, and we're trying to get it standardized, right? That's kind of the problem I have. It's like I hear opinions that, hey, it is a standard, but it's not a standard. It's a draft of a standard. Well, at least that's what the official Nomicon IO says. It's drafted, and there is no finalized canonical implementation in the standard libraries. again, that's what we're trying to push through this call. Have a standard implementation and have this draft label removed. So then we can work with people like wallets to figure out how we're going to support it in the ecosystem. Because as it is right now, the reason why we couldn't just say, hey, we're just going to adopt it right away is because we couldn't find an implementation that was functional. There were too many bugs that were blocking it. And it was not clear if these bugs will be addressed by the previous maintainer. Like, again, that's why we decided not to make a new standard, but to pretty much take over what the standard was, left, and finish it. And I personally think the standard is okay. And why we can't use a multi-token standard and fungible or non-fungible? Yeah, we tried. It's not about the lack of support for extending basic APIs. The problem is the integration, the events, and the expectations of how the state would change and how those changes should be interpreted by the indexers, by wallets, and so on. Like, these are not complete, and that's what we're trying to get complete. In my opinion, it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not. It just needs to be complete. At least at the level of which 1155 is. Because 1155 is not perfect. People don't always use it. People still use it. Use ERC20 a lot, even though 1155 is supposed to fully supersede it. But people prefer simplicity. So they will continue. I think they'll continue to use more fungible tokens and NFTs. And probably this standard, it becomes accepted. And maybe the next standard, I think there'll be a lot more standards coming in the future, particularly with Soulbound and identity. Account abstraction initiatives. I'm sure there'll be more standards coming in the future. We just want to have something that we can work with today.
And I just wanted to say something really quickly. We are at 25 minutes left remaining in the call. So, I mean, it sounds like we're having a pretty lively discussion here. We do have the option of maybe hosting another call to discuss the other things if we want, but otherwise I'd like to, wrap up here so we can move on and let Robert and James get to present the topics they'd like to.
Yeah, fair enough. So just before we wrap up the multi-token standard, I think, Lachlan had to jump off, but I think there was a misunderstanding where he thought that the standard had passed. It is still in a proposed state. And that was kind of, and it's been that way. So, obviously our goal is to get that moving along. Someone mentioned that we should get the wallet perspectives and any feedback from them. And I've added that as an action item for next week. And, hopefully, I think overall, we are mostly on the same page. But I do want to just, quickly, ask anybody else who hasn't spoken yet if they have anything else to say before we move on to Soulbound token.
Like, what's the clear call to action to getting NEP 245 moved forward? Is it fixing the bugs in the actual implementation and moving it down the process, or is it just general? Because I think there's enough stakeholders here to agree that it's needed, but it's kind of not clear what the blockers are.
Right. I think general consensus is basically there, across everybody we've talked to, actually with the exception of Lachlan, who may be, now, have a different perspective now that he realizes that the standard hasn't actually passed. So Shot, what do you recommend? Obviously, you've seen a lot of these conversations. How can we move forward and how can we establish some key action items in your opinion?
So when you originally made the developer governance post, there was a series of the multi-token had the royalties, it had the original implementation I put in the chat. It was kind of confusing to follow and then see what the next steps were. And then I think Vlad was responding to this in the actual implementation, and it kind of and it kind of deferred to group chat. So I wasn't actually sure whether the actual comments from a month ago were addressed. And so that's my main questions. What are the actual tasks associated with fixing the reference implementation so it can move down the NEP process?
All right, and I am going to ask that we actually just full stop right there and move on to let Robert introduce the next topic. Robert, are you there?
Sure. All right. You sure? Okay, you need to give me the right to share the screen.
All right, you should have it now.
Right. Do you see my presentation? Can you see my presentation?
Yep, we can see it.
Right. So I'm going to talk about the Soulbound tokens. Just for a quick intro, I'm representing here like the whole idea of I am human, which we started during the hackathon. Yeah, my background is in general like a lot of stuff related to architecture, designing the blockchains. I also like co-designed the fungible token, so NEP 141. Did like a few very early concepts in here. Anyways, yeah, let's start with like that picture, right? So many people like they think that SBT is NFT, it's just like a token, right? So you hold those tokens in a wallet and you are happy because for some reason, yes, they heard that that's Soul can, I mean, SBT can represent some event or something, and basically it's a non-fungible token. And like the most common way how people implement it is like with so-called non-transferability. Yes, so they call it non-transferable NFT, right? So like there can be like many ways how you can collect those tokens, yes, which we can call this SBTs. And there is a difference between a soul, so the Soulbound token, and a soul. And as the name suggests, a token, sorry, SBT is like a specific token or like an entity, yes, which will bound to a soul. Yeah? So which will bound to like reference an entity in a one-to-one manner. Yeah, so one SBT can be like really only should be pointing only to a one soul. Why soul? Why not human? Why not like, what's the difference between like a soul or like NFT, which can represent a real world asset, right? So a soul is something that we want to identify very, very specifically, right? And like in the way how I phrase it, right? The soul is now, it's something which describes us. So with reference to a human, right, is our identity, right? Is a car our identity? Not really, right? Is a certificate our identity? Also, it's not our identity, but a set of many different things which can describe who you are. Yeah, could be your identity. So in the in the whole background to the SBT standard, yes, I also reference that like this most common identity system, right? So like for the decentralized networks, which is a DID by Web3 Consortium. So DID stands for decentralized identities. It's a very complex, well-written standard, right? But there is a difference. So SBT and like what we represent here, we are not trying to build or like create something which could be modeled as a DID. Those are two completely different models, right? So the SBT approach will more phrase that like describe you, like who you are. I mean, tell me about you, and I will tell you, who you are, right? So like it's like a whole set of descriptions. Yeah, whereas DID is usually controlled by some identity server. Yes, there is a DID document. There is a DID. There are the methods, authorization methods. So there's like a whole big framework, right? Here we try to with SBTs. Yes, we try to like describe the identity by basically like having a claims, right, or anything, yes, that that could be bound to you. So you could have like a few souls, right? Technically, right? So you can have like hundreds of accounts. I guess like everyone in this call has at least one account. And that's normal, right? We are experimenting, we are building. Sometimes we don't know what we want to do. And be reminded of me about that, because that's like having multiple accounts and like creating multiple souls per one identity is like one of the key problems you want to solve in the model we represent here. The SBT was like coined by a paper called The Centralized Society. And the idea here is to create this richer pluralistic ecosystem, right? So there's like no one way. There's no like a single way how this identity can be created, right? So not like specifically with the idea of a state-owned issuer, like a state issuer, so let's say a passport or like a driving license, but a pluralistic ecosystem, right? So maybe like in your smaller community, let's say a meetup community, your organization, your company, yes, you could have like a one way, there could be like another way for something else. And like in combination, you can combine them and create like a different circles. So this co-determined society where souls and communities come together. It's like a bottom up, right? So you can have like this again multiple ways how these claims can be created, and you bottom up, you build that society, which is a phenomena. And instead of like top down, like trying to envision with like a big standard how the identity must work, like for example with the DID, the DID standard. So that's like this crucial determination. Probably the most important part about SBT models is that having a recoverability. So there is no single way how we own the account. There is emerging need, yes, for having having account without the keys, yes. So Near is pushing up with this pass out technology, but even with that, right, like pass out it's somehow bounded to a private key related to a device. If that device is lost, you need to have another key in your account, and if you forget about it, there are many point of failures. Yes, there's MPC technology where you can distribute the key. There can be with this account abstraction, right? So you can have a custody-based solution that your account is represented inside by a custody or maybe a set of custodies. So why we are talking about it, right? Because if you want to phrase that, we're creating the souls and you lose something, or when your identity will be stolen, right? There has to be a process for recoverability. And this is also a key point here that non-transferable NFT by definition cannot be SBT, right? Because for SBT we require recoverability mechanisms. So there could be multiple ways how this recoverability can work. It can be by issuer. So let's say if you create an SBT for every meetup organization member, and then if it's a physical meetup, then people know each other, and when you lose a key or when for whatever reason you want to recover it in a different wallet, then you can do it directly. Similarly, when you have a driving license, you lose your driving license, yes, you file a request and you apply for a new driving license. The old one will be blocked, right, or added to a special registry, yes. So we know that the other one is not valid anymore. Social recovery, yes, so that's the most prominent way how we can do it, but this is super challenging. There are many civil actors, right? So civil attacks, right, for that mechanism. So it requires a very strong conviction, and we need to have a good way to measure that conviction that basically this works. We are not at this stage where we can create it. We have ideas how we can do it, but basically the model we provide is really built around that problem as well. Okay, so here are like a few versions of based on like what we created. So V1, there was a lot of like say kind of a hate or challenging comments in the pull requests for the standard. Most of the people who were like commenting it like didn't know our history, or like didn't know like why we arrived to that mechanism rather than another one. So yes, I have like impression that people who are commenting maybe don't read correctly the other comments or responses. I mean, we are busy, so anyway. So V1 was like what everyone would expect. So we have a smart contract, right? Like, if I create a token, right, I create a new smart contract, and like every SBT would be represented by a separate smart contract. We also wanted to have compatibility with NFT, yes, to like have the like compatibility with existing tooling ecosystem for free. So we did that. It was working. Actually, the V1 didn't work with the NFT compatibility. There were like a few other issues with namings and the indexer. So the full compatibility, NFT compatibility, in fact, was like never achieved because in the meantime we changed the design. So V2, yes, we added like classes by issuer. So something that, to directly solve the problem, what, like the previous presentation was also about like this multi-token. We were already talking about it last year that we need to have classes. Well, at the beginning, yes, we were like finding a reason, like, do we need the classes or do we don't want to have the classes? Because let's say, again, like if there is a claim, right, like technically it should not be possible to have two same claims for the same entity, right? Like you should not have two same the birth certificate, right, or two same licenses, right? So that doesn't make sense. But like when we were like researching more the subject is, we found that like in fact adding the classes opens up some optimizations, but also some like a new ways how you can achieve like what's so-called pseudo anonymity. Okay, and V3, as we realized, like this, like, we were trying hard to make like this NFT compatibility, and we realized that okay, it doesn't work anymore, right? Because again, like this classes concept, right? So they don't translate to NFT, and like having some default, a fallback, I mean like a default argument or a fallback, right? Also, like we had to change the response types, so it didn't make any sense, more any sense. Like we were even considering, okay, like having this, like limited compatibility, but then we decided no, like that would only confuse the tooling and the ecosystem. So we said, okay, this is really something different than an NFT. So and in V4 we in fact added the registry. So from the V1, I need to say that there was no registry, but what we called it was like a different sort of classes, circles. I call it circles. So like a set of this, of the tokens, yes, which would like clarify our set of these claims, yes, which would like in a way clarify portion of your identity, yes, by the people to who you like allow to present it. I will talk about it later on this privacy. So in V4 we realized that when we were implementing so the soul transfer, which is also like the third most important feature of the SBT model, yes, it doesn't work with the V1, V2, and V3. Right, so we had to have like efficient queries to basically make answers directly on chain. And like, I mean, one can argue like for efficient queries, you use indexer. Well, not really, because what if you want to again, like make good phrasing about like a specific set of claims about contract to contract, Of course, smart contract doesn't have an access to the indexer. Well, you can say there can be an oracle, right, which will like provide that, but then you have like a cache invalidation problem, right? And then you can say, oh yeah, maybe maybe user will be in control of that, or like applying some hooks. So yes, in fact, like you are making it more complex. So the way why we created this registry is really because like we went through problems and we didn't find like a better solution. There were like in the review, there were proposed like a few solutions to do it in another way, but it didn't meet the requirements which I'm talking about here, right? So efficient contract to contract queries about like specific set of claims, as well as atomic soul transfer. So soul transfer is something different than the token transfer. I'm not sure if, I think I have a slide about it later on. So bear in mind, soul transfer is the third most important property. By the way, for the efficient queries, in fact, something like zero knowledge proof could work. We would need to have aggregation. We didn't want to solve another complex thing, because it's like idea of I am human and NDC, so the near decentralized collective or digital collective, right? I mean, we want to have it sooner than later. So like if you just add like more and more challenging problems, then you will go to like Ethereum 2.0 problem. And at some point you will need to reduce the scope anyway. So right, so that's like a little bit of background, and I hope that it explains that this registry is not like because we thought that that's the easy way, but that's basically like the way how we think that correctly solves the problem we have. Okay, so there were also like claims in the review that registry is too powerful. Okay, so like in the next few slides, I will talk about like a few comments and the claims of the review, and we'll try to address that. So people may say that the registry is okay. So okay, one thing I didn't explain here is that so the V4, the shift is that instead of having an issuer and the issuer like in a traditional way, having like the smart contract issuer having its own balance book of the tokens, like all the balances are in the registry. So the issue is rather simple, right? Because the issuer will basically call the registry contract to mint. And registry, in fact, is also very simple because it only solves the minting and the queries and this magic soul transfer method. And then a few other things, I will talk about it later.
Hey, Robert. I just wanted to say that we do have a hard stop in 5 minutes. So
Oh my God.
If you wanted to, I know, I'm sorry, like we didn't quite.
Okay, so I will try to speed it up.
Yeah, yeah. And I also want to like make sure that we invite other people to ask questions or if they have any comments or that sort of thing. But
okay, so maybe let's finish up about this registry, because I think this is like the most spicy thing. So yes, is the registry too powerful? No, because like if you look at the implementation, right? The only, let's say, admin thing about the registry is like approving issuer. I mean, there could be like issuer, I mean, so registry like fully powerless, so adminless, which basically only registers the tokens and implements that whole transfer method. But I think like whitelisting issuers is something that, in my opinion, registries should do. And then compare it to the social DB, like it's quite similar, right? But social DB is just like another level of complexity, in my opinion. So if people claim that registry is too powerful, then I'll say, how about social DB? So it's just a pattern, right? Also like giving like how the near works. When the registries, I mean, welcome to the permissionless world. Like we cannot bless one single registry and force everyone to use this registry. So there is a market for improvements, of course, right? Like then if someone wants to mint a token in registry A or in registry B or in a both registries, well, kind of it's his problem. It's rather like, if you want to issue 2 USDC tokens in the same chain, you can, why not? Right? So you can do it, but you need to have like a good reason for that. Yeah, then like a simple revoke, recovery, renew. I'm not going to talk about it. So soul transfer, like this third most important one, is something very, very specific. So like in the first slide, I said that, you can have multiple wallets, but then you mature and you define, oh, actually, for this specific reason, I would like to merge those souls, right? So for that, like merging these accounts, I mean, I think it should be like understandable that it must be atomic, right? So so that's like also like now this registry comes handy here. Okay, privacy. Okay, maybe this one. So I mean, there were claims that it's private because the tokens are registered on the blockchain. Well, this is like the nature of the permissionless public blockchain, right? So it's about the issuer. I mean, what the issuer will in fact like attach to a token. If it's just a number, yeah, you can do some machine learning about like exploration of like who owns like which token, like which account, which tokens. Again, it's numbers, but even with that, you can do some anonymization because you can have like multiple issuer IDs for the same entity, right? So let's say same conference organizer can in fact be represented by a million of identities, sorry, by a million of accounts, because like in the efficient implementation as ours is, we use it just as a number. So worst case, like like we can say that okay, this account knows like sort of holds this amount of tokens, but it's about like the issuer, that's like providing like information what the token really means. But with a zero knowledge proof, like once this will arrive, yes, we can like fully hide all the balances. So again, it's like a broader project problem, right? Like what kind of a privacy do we want? And people who say that okay, yes, this like totally detox the whole ecosystem. Well, like 99% of the blockchain apparently some agencies are already detoxed. So this is the world.
right,
we need to
Robert.
have like a full private blockchain to really assure something which is like fully private.
So Robert, I need to ask you to wrap up here. Is there any like conclusion that you want to give before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, like the conclusion, like is this registry because like there were like the spicy topic, so like comments about it. So I hope that that was like clarified here.
Well, I guess we'll probably have to bring this up again at a future meeting then, because you have 5 seconds left. So thanks so much for presenting. Looks like we're not going to get to James today, unfortunately. But thank you everybody who showed up, and thank you for presenting, and hopefully we can get to
maybe just one note, like if everyone wants to like like collaborate or share some comments, like go ahead to the pull request and leave a comment over there.
All right, well, sounds good. Anyway, once again, thank you everybody for showing up to the first contract standards community call. I hope that we'll be doing more of these in the future, and hopefully they stay productive. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, Maxwell. Thanks all. Bye.